Number 1. The Sanajeh indicus snake coiled around a titanosaur hatchling inside its own nest. In 1984, Indian paleontologist Dhananjay Mohabey of the Geological Survey of India dug into a late Cretaceous bone bed at Dolní Věstonice in Anand district, Gujarat. He pulled out what he thought were eggs and crocodile bones. He boxed them up. They went to the GSI Paleontology Division in Lucknow, catalogued and stored. There they sat for 26 years. In 2010, 4 researchers reopened the boxes. Jeff Wilson from the University of Michigan, Mojave himself, Shanann Peters from the University of Wisconsin, and Jason Head, then at Toronto and now at Cambridge. They saw what nobody had seen before. The crocodile bones were not from a crocodile, they were from a 3.5-meter snake, and the snake was coiled around the egg. Beside the egg was a hatchling sauropod, just emerged from the broken shell. The species got a name, Sanajeh indicus, ancient gaped one from India. The fossil dates to about 67 million years ago, the Maastrichtian stage of the late Cretaceous, from the Lametta Formation. They published in PLOS Biology on March 1st, 2010. The only known direct fossil evidence of snake predation on dinosaurs anywhere in the rock record. Sanajeh belongs to an extinct family called Madtsoidae. These were primitive snakes that lacked the modern ability to unhinge the jaw. The skull anatomy shows a rigid upper jaw with limited gape. Jason Head described it as long-snouted with reduced kinetic flexibility. In plain language, this snake could only swallow small, soft prey. Hatchlings. The egg beside it was 16 to 17 centimeters across, attributed to a titanosaurian sauropod, probably Isosaurus colberti. The hatchling next to the egg was about half a meter long, with vertebrae and limb bones still articulated. The nest had 3 eggs in total. The snake's body wraps around one of them in an S shape, head turned toward the hatchling. Frozen mid-strike inside the nest. The Lametta Formation contains massive sauropod nesting colonies. More than 30 nest sites have been documented across Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh. The site at Dolní Věstonice was buried by a sudden monsoonal flood that drowned the whole scene in minutes. Mainstream interpretation, Sanajeh was an ambush predator, specialized on hatchling sauropods returning to nests during egg-laying season. Counter-interpretation from Michael Caldwell at the University of Alberta, the snake was opportunistic, raiding nests for eggs rather than waiting for hatchlings. Fringe interpretation, the snake was just taking shelter and got buried by coincidence, though the coiled striking posture makes this hard to credit. Matsoids hung on for an extraordinary length of time. The last species, Monambi neracortensis, lived in Australia until about 50,000 years ago, around the time humans arrived. So this lineage of snakes saw both the rise of the dinosaurs and their fall, and then survived another 66 million years after the asteroid hit. Modern Indian rock pythons still raid the nests of monitor lizards and crocodiles, suggesting Sanajeh's ecological niche has been continuously occupied for over 100 million years. The pose is impossible to read as anything other than a feeding posture interrupted by burial. Taphonomically, the bones could not have settled into this configuration by chance. So how often did this happen? Across how many millions of years? The fossil record gives us one frame. The behavior probably ran for 50 million years, and we have to ask what else got buried that we have not yet found. Number 2, the Xiphactinus fish within a fish of the Niobrara Sea. The western interior seaway split North America in 2 during the late Cretaceous. It was a shallow inland sea up to 800 meters deep at its center, stretching from the Gulf of Mexico to the Arctic. The seafloor accumulated carbonate mud in fine, slow layers. The Niobrara Chalk Formation records this sea with a depositional rate of about 5 meters per million years. Burial was slow. Preservation was excellent. In 1952, George F. Sternberg, the most prolific fossil hunter of his generation, excavated a single block in Gove County, western Kansas. The block contained 2 complete fish nested inside each other. The outer fish was Xiphactinus audax, 4.2 meters long, one of the largest bony fish of the Cretaceous. 2 prominent fangs on its upper jaw were used to grip and crush prey whole. Inside that predator, fully articulated, lay a smaller ichthyodectid called Gylicus arcuatus, 1.8 meters long, fully intact, mouth, fins, ribs, tail, all in their proper positions, just compressed inside the body cavity of the larger fish. The fossil tells a story you cannot easily misread. Xiphactinus had swallowed a Gillicus that was too big. Two complete animals, occupying one body outline. The specimen FHSMVP 333 is on permanent display at the Sternberg Museum of Natural History at Fort Hays State University, Kansas. The outer fish's spine is curved into an unnatural S shape, suggesting violent spasms at the moment of death. Mike Everhart of the Sternberg Museum has documented at least 4 similar fish within fish specimens worldwide. This pattern is recurrent, not unique. Xiphactinus did this often enough to leave a recognizable signature. The leading hypothesis, Gillicus thrashed inside Xiphactinus' stomach, ruptured internal organs, and killed both within minutes. Alternative, Xiphactinus suffocated when the prey blocked its branchial respiratory system, the conduit between gills and throat. Third possibility, the prey's spines or fin rays perforated the body wall, leading to internal bleeding. The fossil dates to roughly 85 to 87 million years ago, the Konioscian to Santonian stages of the late Cretaceous. Xiphactinus belonged to the order Ichthyodectiformes, extinct primitive ray-finned fish, and went extinct at the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary 66 million years ago. Gillicus was a closer relative than you might think. Xiphactinus essentially ate its own family. The Niobrara chalk has yielded tens of thousands of vertebrate fossils, pterosaurs, mosasaurs, giant marine birds. It is one of the richest Lagerstätten in North America. The Sternberg specimen was excavated using plaster jackets and transported intact, which was a serious technical achievement for 1952 field paleontology. Modern analog. The great barracuda, Sphaerina. Barracuda is documented to occasionally choke or die from oversized prey, locking its body in a similar arched posture. The behavior of being too greedy to handle the meal you grabbed is apparently very old and very persistent. Counterclaim. Paleontologist David Schwimmer at Columbus State University has suggested some fish in fish specimens represent post-mortem scavenging. A smaller fish entered a dead predator's body to feed on it, but the articulation of Gillicus inside the Sternberg specimen argues strongly against that. The smaller fish is intact. It did not feed. It died. Mainstream consensus today, this is exactly what it looks like. An apex predator that took on a meal too large and died still curled around it. The impossible position is the predator's S-curve and the prey's intact orientation together. Biologically, the only way to get 2 complete fish into one outline is exactly this scenario. The body shape of a Xiphactinus dying is, in this sense, geometrically forced by its own appetite. The next question is whether any other Mesozoic apex predator died the same way and we just have not noticed yet. Number 3, the Dolní Věstonice triple burial. In August of 1986, Czech archaeologist Bohuslav Klima and his team were excavating a Gravettian Upper Paleolithic site called Dolní Věstonice, 2 in the Pavlov Hills of southern Moravia. They cut down through about 1.5 meters of loess, the wind-blown silt that built up during the last glacial maximum, and they found a grave. 3 young adults laid out in a deliberate arrangement. The bodies are cataloged as DV13, DV14, and DV15 by their positions in the grave. The site dates to roughly 26,000 to 27,000 years ago. Radiocarbon dating by Eric Trinkhaus pins it more precisely at 25,950 years before present, plus or minus 250 years. DV13 lay on the right. Probably female, though there is some debate, aged 17 to 20 years old, lying on her back with her head turned right. Her skeleton shows severe pathological deformities, spinal scoliosis, and possibly congenital chondrodysplasia, a condition that produces abnormally short limbs and bone deformities. In life, she would have looked physically different from the other people in her group. DV14 lay in the center. A young man, 17 to 19 years old, in prone face-down position with the knees drawn up to the chest. Face into the earth. A wooden stake, likely fire-hardened, was driven through his hip, interpreted as either a ritual marking or as violence inflicted around the time of death. DV15 lay on the left. Also, a young man, 17 to 22 years old, lying on his back with his right hand placed deliberately on DV14's pubic region. Not near. On. All 3 skulls were coated in red ochre, with the heaviest concentrations on the heads and pelvises of the outer 2. Mammoth scapulae, shoulder blades were placed over the bodies like a protective roof. Over 600 mammoth ivory beads were scattered around the burial. This was not an accidental or hurried death event. Someone arranged this scene with care. 2021 brought important new evidence. Genetic analysis by Cosimo Post and colleagues published in Nature confirmed that the three individuals were not closely related. They were not siblings. They were not parent and child. They were three separate people, brought together for this burial. Mainstream interpretation from Eric Trinkaus at the University of Washington. The burial commemorates a childbirth. Death. DV13, with her physical deformities, may have died trying to give birth. The two flanking males could be the partner and a midwife or attendant. The hand on the pelvis becomes a gesture of mourning, an acknowledgement of the cause of death. Alternative, from Vincenzo Formicola at the University of Pisa. The grave reflects triple sacrifice tied specifically to DV13's disability. In Gravettian societies, individuals with visible physical differences appear to have been treated as ritually significant, perhaps shamanic. The two males could have been sacrificed in connection with her death. Counterinterpretation from Bruce Bauer and others. The three died of an epidemic disease, plague, or something similar, and were buried hastily with symbolic gestures of grief. The hand on the pelvis becomes a final intimate touch rather than a fertility symbol. Fringe interpretation, a sexual ritual sacrifice given the deliberate genital placement of DV15's hand. This lacks supporting evidence beyond the gesture itself. The site also produced the oldest known ceramic figurine, the Venus of Dolní Věstonice, dating to about 29,000 years ago. So we know the people here were producing extraordinarily early symbolic art. The triple burial fits into that broader pattern. The impossible position of these bodies is not anatomically impossible. Bodies could lie this way in life. The impossibility is symbolic. No natural death event arranges three people in this specific tableau. Someone composed this. We just cannot fully read what they meant by it. Number 4. The Meilong Sleeping Dragon. The Yixian Formation in Liaoning Province, northeastern China, has produced more articulated dinosaur skeletons in lifelike poses than any other site on Earth. The Llullaillaco beds, a layer within the Yixian Formation, have yielded over 30 articulated dinosaur skeletons. The preservation mechanism is volcanic. Pyroclastic ash flows from nearby Cretaceous volcanoes, instantaneously buried entire ecosystems. It is the closest thing the dinosaur fossil record has to Pompeii. In 2004, Xu Xing of the Institute of Vertebrate Paleontology and Paleoanthropology in Beijing, working with Mark Norell of the American Museum of Natural History, published a paper in Nature on October 14th titled A New Troodontid Dinosaur from China with Avian-like Sleeping Posture. The animal they described was unlike anything previously documented. They named it Mei Long. Mei meaning sound asleep in Mandarin, and long meaning dragon. Soundly sleeping dragon. The type specimen IVPPV12733 is housed at the Institute in Beijing. It dates to about 125 million years ago, the early Cretaceous, the Aptian stage. The dinosaur itself is small, 53 centimeters long, half a kilogram in mass, smaller than a domestic duck, and the position of the body is the entire point of the discovery. Mei Long is curled into a tight ball. The hind limbs are folded beneath the body, the tail wraps around the right side, the head is tucked under the left forelimb. If you have ever seen a duck sleeping with its head buried in its wing, you have already seen this exact posture. It is identical. The implication is significant. Mei Long is a troodontid, a dinosaur family closely related to modern birds. They share over 100 anatomical features. Feathers, hollow bones, a three-fingered hand, forward-facing eyes with binocular vision, cervical vertebrae that allow about 180 degrees of head rotation, similar to modern owls. The Mei Long specimen suggests that the sleeping posture used by modern birds is at least 125 million years old. Birds did not invent it, they inherited it. Initially, paleontologist Phil Currie suggested the posture might be post-mortem ligament contraction. The body curls up as it dries. But the symmetrical balance of the folded limbs in me long argues for a life position. The body is not pulled randomly into a curve, it is composed. In 2012, Chulingaro and colleagues described a second May long specimen DNHMD2154 in the same posture. Two specimens in the same configuration, the species characteristically slept this way. The volcanic ash likely buried May long while it was alive but unconscious. The most plausible cause is carbon dioxide or sulfur gas asphyxiation from the eruption before the ash itself arrived. The animal lost consciousness, settled into its sleeping posture, and the ash buried it. Mainstream interpretation from Norell, Xu, and Gao. The avian sleeping posture is ancestral to Moniraptoran theropods, meaning birds inherited a behavior at least 125 million years old. Alternative from Daniel Schwartz, the posture might reflect thermoregulation, keeping vital organs warm. Sleep is one expression of this counter-interpretation from Sterling Nesbitt at Virginia Tech. The position could be a defensive posture against ash, with the head tucked to protect the eyes. The animal might have curled up specifically because of the eruption. The Llullaillaco beds have yielded other sleeping posture dinosaurs, including a Psittacosaurus huddle where multiple juveniles surround an adult. So we now know that some Cretaceous dinosaurs lived in family groups, slept in postures that survived into modern birds, and were occasionally buried alive by volcanic events. The impossible position of May Long is impossible only for our previous mental image. The pose is biologically natural. It just rewrites how we imagine Cretaceous animal behavior, less Jurassic Park, more Friday night at a duck pond. Number 5, the Spirit Cave Mummy. Spirit Cave sits 13 kilometers east of Fallon, Nevada, in the dry Carson Sink Desert Basin. The cave maintains stable 15% relative humidity year-round. That is exceptionally dry, drier than most natural environments humans encounter. Whatever falls into Spirit Cave and stays there desiccates. In August of 1940, husband and wife archaeologists Sidney and Georgia Wheeler, working for the Nevada State Museum and the Civilian Conservation Corps, excavated a shallow grave inside the cave. They found a tightly wrapped bundle, a desiccated human body, bound in woven mats, in extreme fetal flexion. For 56 years, the body was believed to be 1,500 to 2,000 years old, based on stratigraphic estimation. That estimate turned out to be drastically wrong. In 1996, R. E. Taylor at the University of California, Riverside applied accelerator mass spectrometry, radiocarbon dating to the bundle. The result, 10,600 years plus or minus 50. That date placed the Spirit Cave mummy among the 5 oldest naturally desiccated bodies in the Americas, not centuries old. 10.5 millennia. From a period contemporary with the latest Pleistocene megafauna. The wrappings are 2 woven mats made from tule rush, Schonoplectus acutus, a wetland plant abundant in Nevada, then and now. The inner mat is a fine diamond pattern twined weave. The outer mat is a coarser plaited weave with overlapping fibers. The body inside is male, age 40 to 44 at death. The position is the key feature. Extreme fetal flexion. Knees drawn against chest, arms threaded through the legs, head bowed against the chest. In life, this man would have stood roughly 1.65 meters tall. In the burial bundle, he is compressed to roughly 0.6 meters. His skeleton has been folded almost in half. The binding pressure on the limbs would have required 30 to 50 kilograms of compressive force. That is significant. Bodies do not fold this small naturally. Mainstream interpretation. The wrapping was applied while the body was warm and pliable, within hours of death, before rigor mortis or full desiccation could lock the natural shape in. His cause of death was chronic infection, a fractured skull wound and severe abscesses on the upper jaw and lumbar spine. He was sick when he died. 2 leather bags accompanied the burial, one containing rabbit fur and the other tool seeds. The hair preserved on the body shows fine reddish-brown coloration. This is the result of post-mortem oxidation rather than living pigment, addressing claims earlier observers had made about red hair indicating European ancestry. For decades, archaeologist Dennis Stanford at the Smithsonian and others suggested that the cranial morphology indicated Caucasoid affinity. This fed a broader controversial hypothesis about pre-Native American migrations to the Americas. The Falun Paiute Shoshone tribe filed a NAGPRA claim in 1997, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, arguing for ancestral connection to the remains. In 2018, Eske Willerslev at the University of Copenhagen published a genetic analysis of the Spirit Cave mummy. The results were unambiguous. The individual's ancestry was directly continuous with modern Native Americans. The Caucasoid hypothesis was definitively refuted. The body was repatriated to the Falun Paiute Shoshone tribe in 2016, after the genetic conclusion had become scientifically clear. It is now reinterred at an undisclosed location chosen by the tribe. The impossible position of the Spirit Cave mummy comes from the binding. The human spine, hips, and shoulders cannot maintain this compressed fetal configuration in life. The body must be folded by someone else and held in place. Someone 10,600 years ago took the time to fold a sick man into the smallest possible form and wrap him carefully. We do not know exactly why. But the wrapping itself is what survives, and it tells us that funerary care, at this level of intricacy, is at least that old. Number 6. The Coelophysis Mass Death Pit at Ghost Ranch. The Whitaker Quarry sits in the Upper Chinle Formation, the petrified forest member, at Ghost Ranch in Rio Arriba County, New Mexico. The rocks date to about 212 million years ago, the late Triassic, the Nourier-Terratian stages. In June of 1947, Edwin H. Colbert of the American Museum of Natural History with his collaborator George Whitaker began excavating what they initially expected to be a routine site. Within weeks, they realized it was anything but. The quarry contained articulated dinosaur skeletons in unimaginable density. Hundreds of them. Eventually, they estimated over 1,000 individuals in a single sediment layer roughly half a meter thick. The site stretches 100 meters long by 30 meters wide. Bone densities reach 50 individuals per cubic meter. Limbs thread through rib cages, skulls invert beneath tails. Animals stack 5 deep. The configuration cannot have been produced by any natural living behavior. The animals are Coelophysis bori, a slender bipedal theropod averaging 2.7 meters in length and 15 to 20 kilograms in weight. They were originally named in 1889 by Edward Drinker Cope from fragmentary fossils. The Ghost Ranch find dramatically expanded what was known about the species. 3 distinct size classes are present in the quarry: juveniles around 1.5 meters, subadults around 2 meters, adults around 2.7 to 3 meters. This suggests a multi-generational social group, not a herd of adults, an entire population, all ages, dying together. So what killed them? The cause of death has been debated for over 70 years. 4 main hypotheses have been proposed. Colbert's original hypothesis from 1947, a flash flood. A herd of Coelophysis was at a riverbank. The river surged, and they all drowned. The bodies were carried downstream and deposited in a single event. Schwartz and Gillette's hypothesis from 1994, drought. A dying waterhole concentrated a population of Coelophysis from across the local area as other water sources dried up. They all died of dehydration around the last pond. Sterling Nesbitt's hypothesis from 2004, volcanic gas. The Newark Basin volcanism, contemporary with the Chinle deposits, may have released toxic carbon dioxide and sulfur compounds. The herd suffocated. David Berman's hypothesis from 1995, a toxic algal bloom poisoned the water source. No single hypothesis explains everything. The lack of trauma marks favors the gas asphyxiation model. The age class distribution favors the drying waterhole model. The site continues to yield new evidence. Then there is the cannibalism story. Colbert reported juvenile Coelophysis bones inside larger Coelophysis stomachs, leading to a celebrated claim that the species engaged in cannibalism. The story appeared in textbooks for 55 years. In 2002, Sterling Nesbitt and colleagues re-examined the bones inside the alleged stomachs. The bones were not juvenile Coelophysis. They belonged to a small crurotarsan reptile called Hesperosicus, an early relative of crocodiles. Cannibalism was disproved 55 years after the original claim. A MNH Block 28 from the quarry contains over 80 articulated individuals in a single 2-meter block. The specimen, AMNH72-23-7-2-2-4, is the most famous piece displayed in New York. New Mexico made Coelophysis its state fossil in 1981. The site contains at least 3 other tetrapod species, Vanclivia campi, an armored reptile, Hesperosuchus agilis, the small crocodile relative, and metapodosaurid amphibians. Recent re-examination by Phil Center at Fayetteville State and Sarah Juengst at UNC Asheville in 2016 suggests the assemblage may represent multiple drought mortality events spanning years, not a single mass death. Stable isotope analysis by Whitney Robbins in 2018 shows the Coelophysis ate both terrestrial and aquatic prey, reinforcing the dying water hole hypothesis. The impossible position here is not any single body. It is the configuration of hundreds. No flock, no herd, no living behavior stacks animals like this. The question is not what they were doing. The question is what specific event packed 1,000 animals into half a meter of sediment. 70 years on, the question is still open. Number 7. The Wari and Chancay mummy bundles with sewn-on false heads. The Wari culture flourished from about 600 to 1100 CE in the central Andean highlands of Peru. They predated the Inca Empire by roughly 500 years and held territory across most of what is now modern Peru. Major Wari sites include Huari, the capital, near modern Ayacucho, Piquilacta, near Cusco, and Conchopata. The Chancay culture flourished later, from about 1000 to 1470 CE, along the central Peruvian coast. They ended with Inca conquest in the late 15th century. Major Chancay sites include the Ancon necropolis north of Lima, Huacho, Pisquillo Chico, and Lori. Both cultures shared a signature burial form. Funerary bundles, called fardos funerarios in Spanish, range from half a meter to 1.5 meters in height. The bundles are conical, smoothly wrapped, often vividly colored by their outer textiles. And at the top of each bundle, sewn on, is a stuffed cloth face. A false head. The body inside the bundle is prepared in stages. First, the corpse desiccates naturally in the arid coastal environment, often outside on a platform for weeks or months. This is sometimes called a second burial in archaeological literature. Then the body is bound into a tight-seated fetal position, knees pressed against the chest, and arms folded. Cotton or wool cords wrap repeatedly around the limbs and torso. The outer wrapping consists of multiple textile layers, sometimes 10 or more, increasing the bundle's overall size. The textiles are often intricate, patterned wool and cotton, dyed in reds, oranges, browns, and yellows from Andean plants and minerals. The defining feature is the cabeza falsa, the false head, a wooden or reed armature stuffed with cotton with a painted or embroidered face sewn onto the top of the bundle. Whereas false heads are more abstract and geometric, Chancay false heads are more naturalistic with embroidered eyes, nose, and mouth. Many bundles contain grave goods, ceramic vessels, miniature looms, llama hair textiles, coca leaves, spondylus shell from the warm waters off Ecuador, traded inland over hundreds of kilometers. Some Chancay bundles contain muñecas, woven anthropomorphic dolls representing the deceased's social role. The Ancon necropolis was first systematically excavated in 1875 by German archaeologists Wilhelm Rees and Alphonse Stubel, who shipped many bundles to European museums. The site has produced hundreds of bundles over a century and a half of excavations. In 2013, Polish archaeologist Miłosz Giersz excavated the Lord of Wari tomb at El Castillo de Huarmey on the north-central coast of Peru. The tomb contained the remains of 58 high-status women, all in elaborate bundles suggesting a royal mausoleum structure. The find dramatically expanded the picture of Wari elite burial practice. Mainstream interpretation from Giersz and from Patricia Pszontka Giersz. The false heads served as ritual proxies. They represented the deceased's social identity in the afterlife, regardless of what happened to the real head over time. A substitute head if the real one decomposed. Alternative interpretation from Hans Hoflund and others, certain bundles may have been cenotaphs, wrappings without bodies inside, made as ritual offerings or memorials for those who died far from home. Genetic analysis by Lars Ferenc-Schmitz at UC Santa Cruz, published in 2014, shows population continuity between Wari, Chancay, and modern coastal Peruvians. These were not migrants. They were the same population whose descendants live in Peru today. The impossible position lies in the binding. The human spine and pelvis cannot maintain this compressed fetal flexion in life. Only post-mortem binding, while the body is still pliable, can produce this configuration, and the false head completes a body that no longer resembles a human silhouette. The bundle becomes a new shape, an artifact, with the body inside it serving as the seat of the form. This is funerary practice as sculpture. Number 8. The Tarim Basin Mummies, Church and Man, and the Beauty of Lullan. The Taklamakan Desert and the Xinjiang Uyghur. Autonomous region of northwestern China is one of the driest deserts on Earth. Annual rainfall in some areas measures under 10 millimeters. Relative humidity drops under 5% for months at a time. The desert sits inside the Tarim Basin, walled in by mountains on every side, a vast sand bowl in the heart of Asia. Swedish explorer Sven Hedin documented the first Tarim Basin mummies at the Lullan site in 1900, kicking off a century of discoveries that has produced hundreds of preserved bodies from across the region. Major sites include Lullan, Shirchen, also known as Hiemo, the Xiaohe, or Small River Cemetery, and Nia. The Xiaohe Cemetery contains approximately 200 burials in an arid lake bed. It was excavated between 2003 and 2005 by Chinese archaeologist Idelisi Ebuduresule. The age range of the mummies spans about 2,000 years. The earliest are 3,800 to 4,000 years old. Some date as recently as 2,200 years ago at the end of the Bronze Age. The famous Churchen man stood 1.93 meters tall, was 50 to 55 years old at death, with reddish-brown hair and blue-gray eyes. The Beauty of Lullan, a woman aged 40 to 50, was rediscovered in 1980 by Chinese archaeologist Mu Xunying, with brown hair and what early observers noted as European facial features. The burial position is highly distinctive. Bodies were laid supine on their backs in boat-shaped coffins made from carved cottonwood. The boats were constructed of cattle hide and in some cases fish skin, stretched over wooden frames in an inverted hull shape. The hide covers face downward, sealing the body from above and creating a closed micro-environment that aided preservation. Faces were painted with red ochre in concentric circles, sunbursts, or spiral patterns across the face. Eye covers, oval wool felt patches placed over each eye, were weighted with leather thongs or stitched in place. The dead were given a deliberately blinded appearance. Clothing included woven wool cloaks in tartan patterns with horizontal stripes, structurally similar to ancient European Celtic tartans. Footwear consisted of felt boots with leather soles, often decorated with cross-stitching. The textiles are remarkably preserved due to the desert's aridity. For decades, the European facial features and tartan textiles fed speculation about migrations from the West. Genetic studies by Christine Lee in 2010 and Yan Chuan Chao in 2021 initially revealed mixed European-Siberian ancestry, supporting some version of a migration hypothesis. Then, in 2021, a landmark Nature paper by Chao Ning, Mingming Niu, and colleagues changed the picture. The Xiuhe population was descended primarily from ancient North Eurasian ancestry, the same lineage as the Malte-Buraid people of Pleistocene Siberia. The mummies were not migrants from Europe. They were indigenous to the region, the genetic descendants of an isolated population that had been there for tens of thousands of years. The cultural connections to West Eurasian textiles, metallurgy, and the Tocharian language family, an extinct Indo-European language preserved in later Buddhist manuscripts, remain unexplained. How does a genetically isolated population end up with West Eurasian-style material culture? The 2021 paper raised that question but did not answer it. Trade goods found in burials include jade beads from China's Hedian region, silk fragments, woolen textiles of likely West Asian origin, and wheat that was originally domesticated in the Fertile Crescent. The Churchen man specimens are housed at the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region Museum in Urumqi. Mainstream interpretation today. The burial positions are deliberately theatrical. Face paint, eye covers, boat coffins all serve to mark the body as a passenger to a destination, not simply a corpse. Counter-narrative. Chinese government discourse has historically downplayed the European phenotypic affinity, and the 2021 ANE study reframed the population as indigenous, which has become the politically endorsed line, although some Western scholars argue the cultural West Asian connections remain underplayed. The impossible position here is the stage composition of the body. Face painted, eyes deliberately covered, dressed and shod, placed inside an inverted boat. A real person, prepared to look unreal. Number 9. The Llullaillaco Inca Capacocha children. Llullaillaco is a stratovolcano on the border between Argentina and Chile, rising to 6,739 meters. At that altitude, the air contains less than half the oxygen at sea level. Temperatures stay below freezing year-round. The summit is a place where humans are not built to survive. On March 16th of 1999, Johann Reinhard of the National Geographic Society and Constanza Cerruti of the Catholic University of Salta excavated a summit shaft on Llullaillaco. The shaft was cut 1.5 meters deep into volcanic scoria. Inside it, they found 3 child mummies perfectly preserved. The bodies date to approximately 500 years ago, at the height of the Inca Empire around 1500 CE. The 3 children are catalogued by their names. La Doncella, the maiden, approximately 15 years old, female, seated cross-legged in a meditation posture. El Niño, the boy, 7 years old, male, similarly positioned. La Niña del Rayo, lightning girl, 6 years old, female, with post-mortem damage from a lightning strike that hit the shaft after burial. The ritual that placed them there is called Capacocha, sometimes written Capacucha in Quechua. It was the highest form of Inca ritual sacrifice, reserved for state crises and emperor transitions. The children were selected from across the empire, taken on a pilgrimage that could last years, then placed on mountain summits to die. The preservation is exceptional even by mummy standards. Internal organs, blood, hair, skin, even cell nuclei remain intact. The maiden's blood retained traces of coca leaves and chicha, the corn beer central to Inca ritual, at the time of death. Hair analysis by Andrew Wilson at the University of Bradford, published in 2013, traced 1 to 2 years of escalating coca and alcohol consumption before death, peaking in the final weeks. The children were progressively sedated and ritualized toward their deaths over months and years. Diet analysis from the same team shows the children switched from a peasant maize-based diet to an elite llama meat diet approximately 12 months before death. This was probably a deliberate fattening or status elevation phase, a way of marking them as worthy offerings before the final ceremony. The children were dressed in finest Inca textiles: feathered headdresses, vicuña, wool dresses, embroidered tunics with geometric patterns. Grave goods included gold, silver, and spondylus shell figurines, miniature llamas, coca leaf bags, and woven sandals. The maiden's lungs showed damage consistent with a respiratory infection in her final weeks. Her body, despite the infection, shows no trauma. Her skull is intact. She likely froze while unconscious from sedation. Mainstream interpretation from Reinhard, Cerruti, and Wilson: the children were sedated with chicha and coca, then placed in the shaft to die of hypothermia at altitude while unconscious. Alternative: the children may have been suffocated by stone capping of the shaft, with sedation as a kindness before the final act. Counter-interpretation: some early analyses suggested live burial without sedation, but the blood chemistry evidence has effectively closed this debate. Genetic analysis by Lars Ferenc-Schmitz and team in 2018 revealed the 3 children belonged to distinct ancestral groups, supporting the hypothesis that they were collected from far-flung provinces of the empire as part of state ritual. The children are housed at the Museum of High Altitude Archaeology, MAAM, in Salta, Argentina, where they are rotated in and out of display every 6 months to minimize light exposure. Their preservation is so complete that intact cell nuclei are visible under microscopy. Proteins and lipids in the tissue remain chemically active. The impossible position of the Llullaillaco children is the holding power of frozen tissue. 500 years of meditation posture preserved by ice. The seated form is so anatomically natural in life, but so unnatural to see preserved in death. These are not skeletons. They are not even mummies in the conventional desiccated sense. They are children, paused mid-breath, looking very much like they will wake up. Number 10. The opisthotonic death pose, the Compsognathus, the Sioux, and the theropod spinal arch. The pose is technically called opisthotonic. The word derives from Greek opisthen, meaning behind, and tonos, meaning tension. It describes extreme dorsal hyperextension of the neck and tail. In a dinosaur, the skull touches the dorsal vertebrae above the hips, the tail curls upward to meet the head, the body forms an impossible vertical C shape. The classic textbook example is Compsognathus longipes, from the Solnhofen limestone of Bavaria, Germany, approximately 150 million years old. Compsognathus was a small theropod, turkey-sized, long-tailed. The Solnhofen specimen is preserved on a pale gray limestone slab, the body locked in the iconic arched posture, mouth open in what looks like a silent rictus. The Berlin Archaeopteryx, specimen HMN 1880, discovered in 1876 in Eichstätt and described by Wilhelm Dames in 1884, exhibits the same pose. The London Archaeopteryx, BMNH 37001, discovered in 1861, also exhibits opisthotonic. Two of the most famous fossils in the world both show the impossible arch. Sue, the Tyrannosaurus rex FMNHPR 2081, was discovered on August 12 of 1990 by Sue Hendrickson at the Cheyenne River Reservation in South Dakota. Sue's neck is preserved thrown backward over the shoulders. A 9-meter Tyrannosaurus frozen in the same posture as a turkey-sized Compsognathus, and a crow-sized Archaeopteryx. Sinornithoides youngri, a Cretaceous troodontid from Inner Mongolia, was described by Dale Russell and Dong Juming in 1993 in dramatic opisthotonic posture. For years, it held the title of the sleeping troodontid before May long supplanted that interpretation. Huscaraptor esquiliae from Mongolia, described in 2017, was preserved in similar arched posture. The pose has been documented in over 300 vertebrate specimens worldwide: theropods, marine reptiles, mammals, modern birds. The configuration appears across taxa separated by hundreds of millions of years of evolution. In 2007, Cynthia Marshall-Feo and Kevin Padian of the University of California, Berkeley, published the seminal study in the journal Paleobiology. The title, The Opisthotonic Posture of Vertebrate Skeletons, Postmortem Contraction or Death Throes. Their answer changed the field. Feo and Padian's hypothesis: opisthotonic is a perimortem phenomenon, meaning it happens around the time of death rather than after. The mechanism involves the central nervous system. Cerebellar damage, asphyxiation, or neurotoxins cause runaway extensor muscle contraction. The longest, strongest muscles in the body, the dorsal neck and tail extensors, contract uncontrollably while their opposing flexor muscles fail. The result is the dying animal's last living act. Not a death pose, a dying pose. The arc captures the body in the moment when the nervous system fails and the strongest muscles win. Modern parallels confirm the mechanism. Dying birds, mammals with strychnine poisoning, and human patients with tetanus all exhibit opisthotonic. Veterinarians see it routinely in animals dying of poisoning, severe head trauma, or asphyxiation. The pose is the body's universal vertebrate response to a certain class of dying. Alternative interpretation from Occam Reisdorf and Michael Wuttke, published in 2012, the pose is post-mortem, caused by drying ligaments contracting after death in dry conditions. The body curls up as it dries. Another interpretation from Daniel Schwartz and colleagues: water immersion causes opisthotonic posture as the body decomposes underwater, with currents pulling the neck back. The Solnhofen Lagoon hypothesis specifically: many animals drowned in the Solnhofen Lagoon and were preserved there, with post-mortem contortion in the water explaining the pose. The Feo-Padian model is the leading scientific consensus today. Perimortem nervous system disruption captured in stone. Counterclaim from Phil Center at Fayetteville State in 2014. Some opisthotonic specimens are taphonomic. Animals decomposed in flowing water that twisted them after death. The truth is probably that all three mechanisms occur in different specimens. The interpretation depends on which one you are looking at. The impossible position is real. The skull touches the dorsal vertebrae, well outside any living range of motion. No muscle contraction in a healthy animal can achieve this. Only the simultaneous failure of every flexor and the runaway contraction of every extensor can produce this curve. We may be looking, through the fossil record, at the last moment of a vertebrate's life, the body's final involuntary act preserved for 150 million years. Taphonomy is the science of what happens to a body between death and discovery. It is the bridge between biology and geology. A bone scattered across a riverbed tells you a species existed somewhere upstream. A bone preserved in articulation, in posture, tells you a specific story about a specific event. 4 physical mechanisms produce impossible-looking poses across the cases in this video. Each one shows up in multiple items. The first mechanism is perimortem neural disruption. Cerebellar damage or neurotoxins cause runaway extensor muscle contraction, locking the body in the opisthotonic arch. Compsognathus, Sioux, Sinornithoides, the 2 Archaeopteryx specimens, and hundreds of other vertebrates all show this. The body's last living act is captured in stone. The second mechanism is post-mortem ligament contraction. As connective tissue dries, it pulls bones into curves. A slower, less dramatic version of opisthotonic that can mimic the perimortem version, the Reisdorf and Wuttke model. This accounts for some, though not all, of the famous opisthotonic specimens. The third mechanism is external binding while the body is warm and pliable. Human cultures compress corpses past the living range of motion before rigor mortis or full desiccation locks the shape in. Spirit cave. The Wari and Chancay bundles, some Tarim mummies. The bodies folded by other people into shapes a living person could not hold. The fourth mechanism is instantaneous burial in fluid sediment or volcanic ash. Traps the body in its living posture before any decomposition can begin. Mei Long. The Sanajeh nest scene, the Llullaillaco freezing the Coelophysis pit. Each represents a moment frozen. Freezing tissue is a special case of instantaneous preservation. The entire body becomes a solid block at the moment of death. The Llullaillaco children. Liuba, the baby mammoth. Otzi, the Iceman. The pose held by ice can persist for tens of thousands of years. Compression by overburdened sediment is a fifth, more boring mechanism. Gravity flattens a body and forces it into apparent contortions that look impossible from a cross-section view, but reflect simple post-burial squeezing. Some Niobrara Xiphactinus specimens show this effect. The interaction of mechanisms is often what produces the most dramatic poses. A Coelophysis dies of suffocation, the perimortem stage. It is buried in mud, the instantaneous stage. Hundreds of conspecifics pile on top, the compression stage. 3 mechanisms in one fossil, Cynthia Marshall. Fo's 2007 paper formally framed the difference between perimortem and postmortem opisthotonic, establishing the modern diagnostic criteria. Taphonomic analysis now reads, bones the way forensic pathologists read crime scenes. The body's final position is evidence of how it died and sometimes of what happened to it afterward. The lesson across all 10 items. A body's posture is never random. Every twist, fold, and arch reflects a specific physical history that taphonomy can, in principle, reconstruct. The fact that we can still distinguish a Triassic gas suffocation from a Mesopotamian binding ritual from a Cretaceous drowning separated by hundreds of millions of years is itself remarkable testimony to how much information bones carry. 5 of the 10 items in this video are human burials. The impossible posture is not natural. It is cultural. Humans deliberately position the dead body to look a specific way. Fetal compression appears across continents and across 26,000 years. Dolní Věstonice in Ice Age, Moravia, Spirit Cave in early Holocene, Nevada. Wari and Chancay bundles in Andean, Peru. The fetal pose appeared independently in cultures that had no contact with each other, suggesting something common about the human impulse to fold the dead small. The fetal pose may symbolize return to the womb, rebirth, or readiness for transition. Different cultures arrived at different specific meanings, but the form recurs. Seated meditation postures, as at Llullaillaco, suggest a different cosmology. The dead is alert, journeying, conscious in the afterlife rather than return to a pre-birth state. The Inca composed their sacrificial children as travelers about to set out, not as infants returning to the source. Boat coffins, as in the Tarim Basin, frame the body as a passenger. The dead are traveling somewhere. They are equipped with provisions. Their faces are painted for the journey. Their eyes are deliberately covered, perhaps so they cannot see what they are leaving. False heads, as on Wari and Chancay. Bundles replace the natural face with a stylized one. This ensures the deceased's social identity survives even if the body's face decomposes. It is a remarkable solution to the problem of identity persistence in death. Red ochre appears across Dolní Věstonice, Tarim, and many other prehistoric burials worldwide. Its symbolic meaning probably involved blood, life force, or fertility, although specific interpretations vary by culture. The color itself appears to have been understood as important across vast stretches of time and geography. Grave goods follow the same logic across cultures: provisions for the journey, tools for status maintenance, ritual proxies, miniature objects representing larger ones, perhaps reflecting beliefs about scale changes in the afterlife. The deliberate placement of one body's hand on another's body, as in Dolní Věstonice D515 on D514, suggests a specific symbolic act we cannot fully decode but cannot dismiss as accidental. Cultural choreography of the dead is one of the oldest universal human behaviors. Neanderthal Shanidar burials show flowers and deliberate positioning at least 60,000 years ago. Eric Trinkhaus has argued that elaborate burial practices may extend back to the emergence of behavioral modernity itself, perhaps 100,000 years or more. The impossible position of these human bodies is impossible only in the sense that nature does not produce it. Culture does. Culture has been producing it for as long as we have evidence. Across every documented culture, the posed body says, this person mattered, this transition matters, and we are not letting the body simply collapse the way an animal's does in the bush. The investment of time, materials, and ritual labor involved in binding a Wari bundle, painting a Tarim face, or freezing a Llullaillaco child suggests that the position of the body was, for these cultures, the most important single fact about the death. The shape of the body was a statement. The German word Lagerstätten, singular Lagerstätte, literally means storage place. Geologists use it for sedimentary deposits with exceptional fossil preservation. Most fossils on Earth are not Lagerstätten. They are scattered, disarticulated, or fragmentary, telling us a body was once present but nothing about its final posture. Two types of Lagerstätten exist: conservate Lagerstätten, conservation deposits, preserve soft tissues and articulated skeletons; concentrat Lagerstätten, concentration deposits, preserve abundant disarticulated remains. The Solnhofen limestone in Bavaria is the textbook conservate Lagerstätte. Fine-grained lithographic limestone, deposited in a late Jurassic hypersaline lagoon at approximately 150 million years ago. The lagoon's salinity discouraged scavengers and decomposing bacteria. Bodies that drifted in or fell in were preserved with extraordinary fidelity. Solnhofen has yielded the iconic Compsognathus opisthotonic specimens, the Archaeopteryx specimens, and tens of thousands of other articulated fossils. The Yixian Formation in Liaoning Province, China, dates to the early Cretaceous. The Llullaillaco beds within it record pyroclastic ash flows that buried animals in lifelike poses. Llullaillaco gave us Mei Long, the Psittacosaurus huddles, and the first dinosaur stomach contents preserved as recognizable food fragments. The Niobrara chalk in Kansas records the western interior seaway between approximately 85 and 75 million years ago, with depositional rates of about 5 meters per million years. The chalk's calcareous mud and oxygen, poor seafloor, preserved Xiphactinus, mosasaurs, pterosaurs, and the famous fish within fish specimen. The Lamita Formation in India dates to the late Maastrichtian and captures the Sanajeh snake and hatchling scene. The Whitaker Quarry at Ghost Ranch sits in the Chinle Formation of New Mexico, late Triassic, and represents a concentrat Lagerstätte with hundreds of kilouices in dense packing. What makes a Lagerstätte? Rapid burial that excludes scavengers, low-energy depositional environment that does not disturb skeletons, anoxic chemistry that slows microbial decay, and stable sediment that resists later erosion. All four conditions must be met. They rarely are. Without Lagerstätten, we would not know that Mei Long slept like a duck. We would not know that Sanajeh hunted hatchlings. We would not know that opisthotonic is universal, or that Xiphactinus sometimes ate prey that killed it. The clustering of major Lagerstätten in the Mesozoic is partly real and partly an observational artifact. The Mesozoic produced more anoxic seafloors, more shallow lagoons during the Cretaceous greenhouse, more volcanic ash deposits in eastern Asia. It also happens to be the geological interval researchers have looked at most carefully because dinosaurs draw funding. New Lagerstätten are still being discovered. The Burmese amber deposits revealed in the 2010s have rewritten our understanding of small Cretaceous animals. Feathered tail fragments, intact insect species, even hatchling birds preserved in 3 dimensions. The fossil record of impossible positions is still expanding. A bone scattered in a riverbed tells you a species existed. A bone preserved in a Lagerstätte tells you what that species was doing in its last moment. Several of the impossible positions in this video remain under genuine scientific dispute, even after decades of analysis. The honest position is that prehistoric bodies do not always tell us everything. They tell us what they tell us. Good science means staying honest about which questions remain open. The opisthotonic pose has at least 3 competing mechanisms. The faux-pedian paramortem hypothesis is consensus today. The Reisdorf and Wuttke postmortem desiccation hypothesis still has advocates. The Schwartz water current hypothesis has advocates too. Probably all 3 mechanisms occur in different specimens. The Ghost Ranch mass death has 4 cause of death hypotheses: flood, drought, gas, algal bloom. Sterling Nesbitt's volcanic gas hypothesis explains the lack of trauma. Schwartz and Gillette's drought hypothesis explains the size class distribution. No single explanation accounts for everything observed. The Dolní Věstonice triple burial has at least 4 interpretations: childbirth ritual, sacrifice tied to disability, plague burial, sexual ritual. The 2021 genetic non-relatedness finding ruled out the family burial hypothesis but did not select among the remaining interpretations. The Tarim Basin mummies present a paradox the 2021 Nature paper raised but did not resolve. The Xiuhi population was ancient North Eurasian by genetics, indigenous to the region, but the material culture, tartan textiles, wheel burial traditions, and the Tucharian language all point west. How does a genetically isolated population end up with West Eurasian-style material culture? The question is open. The Spirit Cave mummy is settled scientifically by DNA. The Native American ancestry conclusion is unambiguous, but the binding mechanism remains debated. Was the body wrapped immediately after death while pliable? Or progressively as it desiccated over weeks? The May long sleeping posture is interpreted as sleep, but it could be thermoregulation, or defensive crouching against the ash, or something else. 2 specimens cannot distinguish among these hypotheses. We need more. The Xiphactinus cause of death has 3 possibilities: stomach rupture, suffocation, perforation. The modern barracuda parallels support suffocation, but no single Xiphactinus specimen shows direct evidence pointing to one mechanism. The Wari and Chancay false head served multiple possible functions: ritual proxy, status marker, cultural identity preservation. The function probably varied by individual case and by subculture. The surviving documentation is limited. The Llullaillaco children's cause of death, hypothermia under sedation versus suffocation by stone capping, remains under debate. Ethical questions about display continue. The Sanajeh specimen represents one frame of a behavior that probably ran for 50 million years. Was the snake an obligate nest specialist or an opportunist? One fossil cannot answer this. We need many more. Each open question represents a frontier. The next fossil discovery, the next genetic analysis, or the next chemical study could resolve a long-standing puzzle. Scientific progress is what these debates are. The absence of perfect answers is not failure. It is the normal state of any active field, and every uncertainty here is also an active research program. Across 200 million years and 4 continents, the bodies in this video share a single property. Their position is the most important fact about them. The Sanajeh snake did not just exist. It hunted a specific hatchling on a specific afternoon, and the curl of its body still tells us so. Xiphactinus did not just swim the western interior seaway. One individual ate one specific meal that killed it, and the S-curve of its spine still tells us so. Mei Long did not just live in the Liaoning forest. One small dinosaur curled to sleep, breathed in volcanic gas, and the tuck of its head still tells us so. The Dolní Věstonice teens did not just die in Ice Age Moravia. 3 specific young people were arranged by other specific people in a tableau none of us can fully read, and that arrangement still survives. The Spirit Cave mummy did not just live and die in Nevada. One specific man, sick and dying, was wrapped tightly by people who cared enough to compress his limbs past their natural range. The Coelophysis pit did not just record a Triassic species, it captured a single bad afternoon for 1,000 specific animals, and the impossible density still tells us so. The Wari and Chancay bundles, the Tarim mummies, the Llullaillaco children, each represents not abstract cultures but particular humans, posed by other particular humans with specific intent. The opisthotonic dinosaurs may represent the closest thing the fossil record gives us to a living moment. Not behavior averaged across millions of years, but the involuntary act of dying preserved in stone. A bone scattered tells you a species. A body posed tells you a life. The bodies we have inherited from the deep past come with obligations. To interpret them as carefully as we can. To acknowledge their origins. And where they are human, to honor what their original cultures meant by them. The Spirit Cave repatriation in 2016, the Llullaillaco rotation in display, the still unresolved questions about the Tarim narrative, all these are reminders that prehistoric bodies are not just data, they are also somebody. The impossible position of a long-dead body is, in the end, an invitation to slow down and pay attention, to ask what specific event, what specific decision, what specific moment locked this particular shape into stone. The fossil record will continue producing more such bodies. Each one will ask the same question: what was this moment exactly, and how did we get to see it? The answer is always partial. But the asking is what science is for.